Montana Territory, 1878. The wind howled down from the crazy mountains, sharp and cold. But it was not the wind that made Laurel Whitlow's hand tremble as she stepped off the stagecoach in White Rock. Her left arm, braced in stiff leather and bent awkward at the elbow, would never straighten again. She had stopped hoping it might. The break healed wrong after her fall from the hayloft 3 summers ago, and her father had said it plain. No man wants a crippled wife. He had not meant it cruelly, just truthfully, and she had believed him. White Rock was not much, just a few low buildings, a church, and a dusty main road, but it was far enough from the family farm in Wyoming to feel like a different world. She had come here for work, for air, and maybe, if she was honest, to finally live as she pleased. At 24, she had grown tired of waiting for life to start. But the first man she met, the foreman at the boarding house, looked her over and said, "With that arm? Best you look elsewhere, miss." He tipped his hat, but the pity in his eyes burned more than the rejection. Laurel walked out with her valise, her cheeks hot and pride stung raw. She was halfway down the road, unsure where to go next, when a voice behind her rang out, low and sure. "You looking for work? Or just planning to wander till the snow comes?" She turned. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, with a trail-worn coat and a dust-covered hat in his hand. His hair was dark with a hint of wave, and the sun caught on the gold in his brown eyes. He looked like the kind of man who had seen 100 miles of trouble and kept riding through it. "I was hoping for work," she said, lifting her chin. He glanced at her arm, then back to her face. "You cook? Well enough. You ride? With one hand?" He nodded once. "That'll do." She blinked. "You are hiring?" "I am. My name's Garrett Boone. I got a ranch 20 miles west and a boy there who needs hot meals and someone who knows books better than me. If you can cook, teach, and do not mind a bit of dust, I will pay fair." Laurel hesitated. "Why me?" "Because you did not look away when I saw your arm," he said simply. "Most folks do." She looked down at her braced arm, the leather cracked and faded. Her fingers curled in instinct, though they barely worked. His words settled into something quiet in her chest. "All right," she said. "I will come." The ride to the Boone Ranch was long, but not unpleasant. Garrett rode steady and spoke little, but when he did, his voice was warm. He pointed out the ridgelines, the creek where the trout ran, and the broken fence line he meant to fix before winter. Laurel sat straight in the saddle, her arm aching, but she did not complain. When they reached the house, 2 stories, weathered pine, a wide porch, she spotted a small figure darting from the barn. "That's my boy, Holden," Garrett said. 8 years and too smart for his own good. Holden stopped short when he saw her, his gray eyes wide. Garrett dismounted and called over, "Holden, this is Miss Laurel. She is going to help out around here. Be polite." Holden tipped an imaginary hat. "Ma'am." Laurel smiled. "Hello, Holden." She followed them inside. The house smelled of wood smoke and old leather. A fire snapped in the hearth. There was no sign of a woman's touch, no curtains, no stitched pillows, just clean floors and shelves lined with books and tools. Garrett showed her the small room off the kitchen. "You can have this," he said. "There is a stove out back for cooking, and the school books are in the trunk in the front room. Holden needs to keep up." She nodded, grateful. "I will earn my keep." He paused. "You already have." Days passed, then weeks. Laurel found a rhythm at the Boone Ranch. She rose early, baked biscuits with one good hand, taught Holden his numbers and letters, and helped gather eggs from the hens. She could not lift heavy things, but she patched clothes, read aloud in the evenings, and kept the kitchen warm and full. Garrett worked sunup to sundown, but he always stopped long enough to ask, "How was the day?" and listened to the answer. He never stared at her arm. He never asked what happened. He only watched her with that same steady look, like he saw something in her that she had forgotten she had. One night, after supper, Holden sat drawing by the hearth and Garrett leaned against the doorframe. "You like it here?" he asked. Laurel looked up from her mending. "I do. I am glad." He hesitated. "You do not talk much about where you came from." "There is not much to say," she said. "My father thought I was broken, and folks there believed him. You do not seem broken to me. She looked at him then, really looked. He meant it. There was no pity in his voice. Just truth. Her throat tightened. Thank you. He nodded once, then stepped outside, the door clicking shut behind him. 2 nights later, a storm rolled in. Garrett had not returned from riding fence, and dusk had already fallen. Laurel paced the porch, her shawl drawn tight. The wind howled through the pines. Holden sat inside, wide-eyed. Miss Laurel, will he be all right? He will, she said, though her heart was pounding. She lit a lantern and stepped into the dark. She found him an hour later, his horse limping, one hand pressed to his side where a fence post had caught him hard. Blood soaked his shirt. I need help, he said, voice tight. She did not pause. She tied her lantern to the saddle horn, helped him up with one hand, and guided the horse home slow and steady. Back at the house, she cleaned the wound, stitched it with shaking fingers, and sat by his side all night. Her arm ached. Her back burned. But she did not leave him. In the gray light of dawn, his eyes opened. You stayed, he said, voice rough. I was not going anywhere. He reached for her hand. You are the strongest woman I know, Laurel. She swallowed. Even with this? She held up her crooked arm. Because of that, he said. You lived through it. You did not give up. She looked at him, and something opened in her chest. Something warm and full. I never thought anyone would see it that way. I do. And he meant it. She leaned forward, brushed his hair back from his brow, and kissed him soft. It was not a grand kiss. Not hurried. Just steady and full of all the things they had not said. His hand came up to her cheek. Laurel. Yes. Stay. Not just here. With me. For good. Tears welled in her eyes. I was hoping you would ask. He smiled then, real and full, and she saw the man behind the quiet, loyal, kind, steady as the land. And for the first time in her life, she felt whole. The first snow came early that year, drifting in quiet and soft across the open range while the cattle huddled close to the lower pasture. Garrett's wound was healing, though stiff, and Laurel kept a kettle going near the hearth with spruce tea and willow bark steeped into it. She didn't ask if he was in pain, he didn't say, but she noticed the way he moved slower when lifting the feed sack, how he paused longer at the door before heading out. Leave it, she said one morning, folding a cloth over a pan of bannock bread. You've got Holden and me now. Garrett rested his hand on the doorframe, eyes on the pale sky. I've had to do for myself a long time. Hard to let go of that. Laurel didn't answer right away. She set the bread aside, wiped her hand on her apron, and looked at him. It's not weakness to let someone care. His expression changed, not in a way that showed easily, but something in his shoulders eased. He nodded once and stepped back inside. Holden had taken to sitting beside her during lessons, one leg bouncing under the table as he worked out his sums. He was quick with numbers but impatient, chewing the end of his pencil as if it might speed the answers along. You get one thing right and want to skip the rest, Laurel said, tapping the paper. But every step counts. He frowned. Pa says the same about fence mending. Smart man, your father. Holden grinned, gap-toothed and mischievous. You like him, don't you? Laurel raised a brow. I wouldn't be here if I didn't. The boy leaned in, lowering his voice as if the walls might be listening. He likes you too. He keeps slipping up and setting 2 forks on the table at supper. She smoothed his hair with her good hand. Then I'll be sure to keep setting 2 plates. Later that week, Garrett returned from town with a length of fabric wrapped in brown paper and a cast iron kettle tucked beneath his arm. He set them on the table without comment, then busied himself with unbuttoning his coat. Laurel untied the paper, revealing deep blue wool, thick and soft. She ran her fingers along the weave. Thought you might want something warmer, Garrett said without looking up. For the cold months. She traced the edge of the cloth. I haven't had anything new in years. I figured. He glanced at her then, and something unguarded passed between them. You've earned more than that. She didn't say thank you. Not because she wasn't grateful, but because the words felt too small. Instead, she stitched the wool into a winter shawl, simple and strong, and wore it the next morning when she stepped out into the frost. By mid-December, the creek had hardened to ice and the house shrank to a world of its own. The days shortened and the three of them settled into a quiet rhythm. Garrett carved small pieces of pine into animals for Holden, who painted them with berry juice. Laurel baked pies from dried apples and taught Holden how to string letters together into real thoughts. His first letter to his father was 3 sentences long and made Garrett sit at the table longer than usual, reading it twice, lips pressed tight. One evening, after Holden had gone to sleep, Garrett stood beside the fire, his shirt sleeves rolled up, hands clasped behind his back. "I've been thinking about spring," he said. Laurel folded her sewing. "What about it?" "There's a piece of land east of the pasture. Flat enough for a vegetable patch. I could build a small cabin there. Unless you'd rather stay in town." She looked across the room at him, unsure if he meant what she thought he did. "I don't want a separate cabin," she said. Garrett didn't move. "You want something else?" "I want the same roof. Same table. Same bed eventually, if that's what you're offering." His voice was quiet. "It is." She crossed the floor, her shawl slipping from her shoulders. He reached for her hand, the one still strong, and held it in both of his. "I never imagined this," he said. "A woman who sees me plain and stays anyway." Laurel brushed her thumb over the scar along his knuckle. "You saw me plain, too?" He kissed her hand, slow and certain, and when their foreheads came together, it felt like the final piece of something long waiting to be whole. Outside, snow whispered against the windows, and the wind carried no threat, only the promise of what they'd build. Come thaw. By late January, the cold deepened, and the wind lost its voice to silence. The snow lay untouched beyond the barn, crusted over like glass, and the world seemed to hold its breath beneath the weight of winter. Laurel stitched by lamplight most evenings now, repairing collar seams or patching Holden's worn trousers, her hands steady even when her back ached from long days on her feet. Garrett had taken to sitting at the kitchen table after supper, polishing his tools or straightening the ledger book line by line. He never asked for help, but Laurel began reading the numbers beside him, noting which cows had calved early, which feed stores ran low. "You've a head for this," he said one night, eyes on the page but voice warm. "I used to help my older brother with seed orders," she replied, "before he married and moved east." "You miss him." "Sometimes. Mostly I miss the feeling of being needed for something that mattered." Garrett set the pencil down. "You are needed here. I hope you know that." She looked at him then, not just to meet his eyes, but to let the quiet between them settle into something understood. He didn't reach for her, didn't speak further, but his presence, solid, unshifting, was its own kind of touch. Holden's birthday came near the end of February, marked by a sourdough cake crusted with molasses and a hand-carved whistle Garrett had shaped from cottonwood. Laurel gifted him a small pouch sewn from buckskin scraps, filled with pebbles polished in vinegar and cloth until they shone like river glass. "Can I sleep in the loft tonight?" Holden asked around a mouthful of cake. Garrett raised an eyebrow. "Suppose, if you don't mind the cold. I want to watch the sky turn." Laurel glanced to the window. "It'll be clear tonight. You'll see every star there is." After Holden climbed the ladder with the blanket bundle under his arm, Garrett lingered by the stove, feeding in a split of pine. "You ever think about more?" His voice was low but steady. Laurel folded her arms, letting the heat warm her front. "More what?" "More than this house. More than just getting through the season." She hesitated. "I don't need more. Not in the way most folks mean. But I used to dream of growing things. A garden. Maybe a few goats. Not just surviving, but shaping something from the ground up." Garrett nodded. "There's a stretch of land near the creek. Soil's darker there. I always meant to try planting, but the time never lined up." She tilted her head. "It's not too late." "No," he said. "It's not." The next morning, he brought her a folded map, edges frayed with use. He laid it across the table, pointing to a curve in the land just beyond a copse of cottonwoods where runoff pooled in spring. "That's where I'd start," he said, "if you're serious about the planting." "I am," she answered, "but I'll need your help. I can't do the digging alone, not with this arm." "You'll have it." He tapped the spot again. "We'll fence it in come thaw." She traced the lines on the map with her fingers, imagining rows of beans and corn, maybe even potatoes if the soil proved kind. The thought stirred something beneath her ribs, not just hope, but a sense of forward motion. That afternoon, while Holden worked on his writing, Laurel took down a length of muslin and began sketching out a planting chart. She didn't know everything, but she knew enough to start. She'd learned from watching, from listening, from her mother's quiet mutterings over seed sacks and frost dates. Garrett stepped inside with a dusting of snow on his shoulders. He saw the muslin spread out and paused, then smiled, not wide, but with the kind of ease that came from knowing something good was beginning. "Already planning?" he asked. "I don't like waiting on dreams," she said. He stepped closer, resting a hand on the back of her chair. "Neither do I." That evening, after Holden had gone off to bed, Laurel stood at the kitchen window watching the snow glint beneath the moon. Garrett came up behind her, close but not crowding. His hand brushed against hers on the windowsill. "I never thought I'd want a future again," he said quietly. "Not after what I lost." Laurel turned to him. "What did you lose?" "My wife. Holden's mother. She died birthing him. I never blamed him, but I think I blamed life. Like I'd used up all my good and didn't deserve more." She didn't speak. Instead, she reached up and placed her palm against his chest, feeling the steady beat beneath. "You have more to give," she said, "and you deserve every bit of what comes next." He covered her hand with his own, rough against her smooth skin. "Then let's make something of it," he said. "You, me, and the boy. Something lasting." Laurel nodded, her breath catching not from fear, but from the weight of something solid forming between them. "We already are." By early March, the snow began to retreat from the fence posts, leaving behind patches of wet earth and the first hints of dormant grass. The days lengthened, steady and slow, and the sun carried a different weight, less brutal, more forgiving. Laurel stood behind the house with her sleeves rolled, her hands sunk wrist deep in the thawed soil of what would become their garden. She pressed her boot down to turn a clump, then used the small spade Garrett had sharpened for her that morning. Her arm ached from the effort, but she worked methodically, mouth set, breath steady. Garrett approached from the barn with a coil of twine in one hand and 2 stakes in the other. "If you mark the rows before you dig too deep," he said, "you'll save yourself trouble later." She looked up at him, hair pulled back with a strip of muslin. "I don't mind the trouble." "I know," he said, kneeling beside her, "but it's still good to plan." They worked in tandem, him driving stakes while she tied twine to frame the rows. For a time, there was only the sound of wind brushing through the cottonwoods and Holden's voice in the distance calling to the hens. Garrett paused to wipe his brow with the back of his hand. "I never thought I'd see this place hold more than cattle and fences," he said. Laurel stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. "What did you think it'd hold?" "Just enough to get the boy grown and the years behind me." She turned toward him, her face shaded beneath the brim of her bonnet. "And now? I see a home, not just a holding. It's different." She nodded once, then bent to gather the tools. "We'll need seed potatoes soon. And beans that climb. I'll ask the woman at the mercantile if she'll set some aside." "I'll ride in with you," he said. "There's a fellow there owes me a favor. I'll collect it." They left Holden with the neighbor's daughter, a girl of 13 with a serious face and a quiet way of keeping order. Laurel packed a small parcel of dried eggs and fresh lard for barter, and Garrett hitched the wagon while she secured her shawl. The ride into White Rock was long but familiar now, the road rutted in places from meltwater, the air sharp with pine. As they passed the edge of the riverbed, Garrett broke the quiet. "You ever think about marrying again?" Laurel kept her eyes on the trail. "Not until now." He waited. "I used to think it wasn't meant for me," she said. "That the way I was made meant I'd always be beside things, never within them." He didn't respond right away. "Then you're not beside anything now." She looked over, and he met her gaze, steady as a stone. "I'd marry you today if I knew you wanted it," he said. Her voice came quiet. "I do." He nodded. "Then we'll speak to the circuit preacher next time he rides through." At the mercantile, Laurel spoke with the shopkeeper's wife about seed stock while Garrett stepped into the back room to settle a debt with the blacksmith. Laurel selected 2 sacks of seed potatoes and a wrapped bundle of dried beans, then paused by the bolt of cotton calico near the counter. The shopkeeper's wife squinted down at her twisted arm but didn't speak of it. Instead, she said, "You're the one staying out with Boone, aren't you?" Laurel nodded. He's different since you came, the woman said. Talks more. Spends less time at the edge of things. Laurel gave a small smile, then paid what she owed in lard and eggs and a crocheted handkerchief she'd made during one of the colder weeks. As she stepped outside, Garrett met her on the boardwalk, his hand resting lightly on her back as they headed for the wagon. On the ride home, they passed a stretch of open field where a hawk circled low above the grass. Holden asked if he could have a dog, Garrett said. Says the chickens need guarding. Laurel raised an eyebrow. Or he needs a companion who'll chase him through the yard. I told him we'd think on it. She smiled. Let's think on it, then. By the time they reached the ranch, the sun had dipped past the ridge and the house glowed faint with lamplight. Holden ran out to greet them, cheeks red from wind, arms full of chicken feathers and dried grass. I made a nest for the broody hen, he called. Laura lifted the sack of seed potatoes. Then she'll need something to guard it. Holden's eyes lit up. You mean it? We'll look for a pup come spring, Garrett said, lifting the boy into the wagon bed. Something smart and gentle. Like your ma was. Holden glanced at Laurel, then down at the bag in her arms. Is she gonna be my ma now? Laurel crouched beside him, steadying her balance with her good arm. Only if you want me to be. Holden nodded, thoughtful. I do. Inside, after supper, Laurel stood by the wash basin, drying her hands. Garrett came up behind her, his palm resting lightly at her waist. There's more to build than fences and gardens, he said. She leaned back into him. And we'll build it all. Together. He pressed a gentle kiss to her temple, and for the first time in either of their lives, the future lay ahead not as a burden but as a promise. By late April, the last of the snowmelt had soaked into the earth, and Garrett's pasture bloomed with wild violets and the first shoots of wheatgrass. The creek ran full again, tugging at its banks, and the cottonwoods unfurled their green with a slow, deliberate grace. Laurel stood at the edge of the garden one morning, squinting at the neat rows of sprouting beans. Her shawl traded now for a worn linen blouse and a wide-brimmed straw hat Garrett had found in the cellar. Her crooked arm hung cradled in a loop stitched into her apron, freeing her other hand for work. Garrett stepped out of the barn, sleeves rolled, boots streaked in black mud. Fence held through the thaw, he called. No sign of breakage along the south post. She brushed soil off her fingers. I was half expecting the whole line to sink. I braced it extra last fall, he said, walking toward her. Didn't want surprises come spring? She met his gaze, steady beneath the brim. You've thought ahead for a long time. Even when it was just you and Holden. Thinking ahead didn't mean much before, he said. It does now. Holden's voice rang out from somewhere behind the house. He's here. Laurel turned as the neighbor boy led a gangly-legged pup by a rope halter. The dog's ears flopped unevenly, its coat a patchwork of wheat and rust. Holden ran up beside it, out of breath. He was the smallest of the litter, he said. But he's the fastest. Watch. The pup darted forward, tugging free, then circled back and sat square at Garrett's boot, tail sweeping the dirt. Garrett crouched low, rubbing behind its ears. Looks like trouble. Holden grinned. He's called Tansy. Laurel raised an eyebrow. Tansy's a flower. I know, said Holden. But he smells like one when he dries off. That evening, Laurel sat on the porch steps, peeling apples by lamplight while Holden tossed a knotted rag for Tansy across the yard. Garrett joined her with 2 tin cups of spruce tea, the heat rising in soft curls. He handed her one, then settled beside her, watching the boy run through the dusk. I spoke with the preacher, he said. He'll be here next week. Laurel cut through the last apple slice, set her knife down. And he asked if we wanted a service in the chapel or here. I told him here. She nodded, her voice even. That's right. There's no one from your family I should send word to? She shook her head. They made their distance clear back when the injury happened. I'd rather fill the benches with people who want to see us happy. Garrett's eyes didn't leave hers. You're sure? I am. I don't need their blessing. He reached for her hand, folding it into his. You have mine. And Holden's. And the neighbor girl's, I reckon. She's been plaiting wildflowers all week. Laura leaned into his shoulder. Then I've got all I need. The morning of the wedding dawned clear, the sky a soft blue threaded with wisps of white. The grass still held a touch of frost, but the sun warmed it quickly. Garrett wore his cleanest shirt, the one he'd only used for town dealings, and Laurel tied a strip of muslin around her waist in place of a sash. Holden stood between them with his hair slicked back and a string-tied pouch in his palm, a simple gift he'd made from river stones and dried sage. The preacher stood beneath the cottonwood tree, his traveling Bible in hand. There were no rows of pews, no organ music, only the wind moving through the branches and the hush of the land around them. Tansy sat curled at Holden's feet, tail still. Garrett's voice was low but firm as he spoke his vows, eyes never leaving Laurel's. I offer what I have, my land, my strength, my hand. I'll carry what's yours as if it were mine. Laurel's voice trembled only once. I come as I am, not whole but willing. I give you what life's left me and all that I've made of it. The preacher nodded. By your words and your bond, you are joined. Garrett leaned down and kissed her slow, no rush, no show, just the kind of kiss that grows from knowing someone root deep. That night, after Holden had fallen asleep with Tansy curled at his knees, Garrett and Laurel sat on the porch wrapped in a wool blanket, listening to the crickets tuning themselves for summer. The moon hung low, casting pale light across the yard where rows of young beans reached upward like fingers toward the stars. Garrett threaded his fingers through hers. I didn't think I'd get another chance at happiness. Laurel rested her head against his shoulder. You didn't get another chance. You made it. That's different. I never thought peace would look like this, he said. She smiled, eyes closed. Peace always looks like something you work for. He turned and kissed her temple, slow and sure. Inside, the fire crackled low. The beds were warm. The future waiting only to be lived. And for the first time, nothing felt unfinished. They would rise tomorrow and plant the rest of the carrots. Bake cornbread with the last of the buttermilk. Watch Holden teach Tansy to sit. And every day after that, they would build their life with quiet hands and open hearts, the way all solid things are meant to be made.